What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to show you how to make seamless half drop repeats in Procreate entirely while maintaining all of your layers. Before we jump into the project, the brushes that I am using today are from two different packs. I am using the risograph brushes from Uproot. They are super fantastic. The secondary brushes that I'm using are my own scattered stamps. Both of those are linked in the description. As always, you can use any brushes that you want for this project. For this one specifically, we're getting this cool risograph print texture, but of course, you can create patterns in any style using this method. You can get a starter canvas with blank layers and all the selections set up and the layers grouped together for this project following the link below. I also provided the color palette for this project. If you sign up for my newsletter, you can get a sample of the scattered stamp brushes as well, so definitely check that all out. That's all linked below. Now let's get into it. Before we jump into the project itself, let's cover what a half drop pattern is and how that differs from a full drop repeat. In a full drop repeat, the pattern is tiled in a grid and aligned horizontally and vertically. So here, if each square is one full repeat and I put a dot here in each repeat to represent the motif, it can start to look pretty rigid and linear, and it's a lot easier to find where the actual seam of the pattern is. In a half drop repeat, the repeat is still aligned vertically, tiled up and down, but horizontally, the repeat is staggered a half step down. This can help a pattern appear more organic, and it can help hide where the actual repeat is. So when we're building the pattern today, we're still going to be working within a square, but any elements that cross the edge of the repeat will be staggered half a step down on the other side of the repeat. Now that we know a little bit more about this repeat type, let's set up a canvas from scratch so that you can do this in the future in any canvas dimension that you want. So what I have working here is a 2000 by 2000 pixel canvas. If you've seen my method for creating full drop repeats, I'm going to do something similar here. We'll be setting selections for the 4 quadrants, but then in addition to the 4 quadrants, we're going to be setting selections for each vertical half of the canvas. Now I have just one layer here, and I'm going to start by filling it with color. Use color drop to drag the circle of color from the upper right into the canvas until it fills the entire screen, keeping your pencil touching to the screen the entire time. You'll see this blue slider bar appear at the top. This indicates the color drop threshold, which means the amount that the color fills. To fill the entire canvas, what you'll want is for it to be set really high, so at least in the 90s. Once the layer is full, tap the transform tool in the upper left. In this bottom toolbar, set the transform mode to uniform so that the object transforms proportionately. Over here, make sure that the interpolation is set to bilinear. This setting just controls how the pixels render when the object is scaled and moved. Setting it to bilinear will help ensure that things stay precise. Then over here on the left, tap the icon for snapping to bring up this little settings menu. Here we're going to turn on magnetics and snapping, and then on the bottom sliders, we're going to set distance and velocity all the way to max. What distance controls is how far the object can be from a guide on the canvas before it snaps into place. So at max, it'll snap within 50 pixels of the guides. The guides are indicated on the canvas by these golden blue lines. Velocity controls how freely you can move an object around the canvas. So when it's set at maximum, it'll be the most sticky, so to speak. The object will really just jump from one guide to the other. Now with these settings, you can resize the square. You can simply drag the object over until it snaps into the upper quadrant, and when it snaps, you'll see the gold guidelines indicating that the corner has snapped to the exact center of the canvas. Alternatively, and this is my preferred method, you can drag from the corner node to resize the square, which allows this box to pop up that indicates the pixel dimensions of the object. I like this way because then you know exactly when to release the object. Once it's set, lift up your pencil and then taking care not to tap anywhere else on the screen, just tap to open the layers panel. Now we're going to select the layer contents. You can do this one of two ways. You can tap the layer to open the side menu and choose select, or you can use 2 fingers to press and hold on the layer until the selection appears. When it's selected, on the bottom selection toolbar, tap this heart icon to tap save and load, and then tap the plus sign to save this as selection 1. Now repeat for the second quadrant. Use color drop, then tap the transform tool to scale the layer contents, this time dragging from the lower left corner. Tap the layers icon to release the object and then select the layer contents. Now you can save this selection as selection 2. Now repeat for the third quadrant using color drop to fill and then tap the transform tool. Drag this time from the upper right until it snaps into place. Then tap the layers icon, select the layer contents, and save this as selection 3. Repeat all of these steps one more time for the lower right quadrant. Once the first 4 quadrants are saved, color drop to fill the canvas once again. Then tap the transform tool, and to set the vertical halves, we're going to drag the entire object over until it fills just half of the canvas. The top and bottom center nodes of the object with the green and the orange extenders should be aligned with the left-hand canvas corners. You'll also want to ensure that the gold guidelines appear, 1 vertical in the very center of the canvas, and then 3 horizontal lines. This will indicate that it is aligned to the exact middle of the canvas. With this placed, tap the layer icon and then select the layer contents and save this as selection 5. Now, without leaving this selection, still on the bottom toolbar, tap invert to select the right side of the canvas. Then save this selection as selection 6. Now your canvas is entirely set up, so from here you can proceed to pattern creation. For the rest of this project, I'm going to be using my pre-made canvas, which has all of these selections already set, and additionally, these 2 guide layers that will help with some of our later steps. In this canvas, I've also set up 5 layers in a group to create the actual pattern. To start out, keep the blue guide layer visible, and then move down to work within the pattern group. Tap on the background fill layer. For my background, I'm going to be using this soft pink color, and I'm going to use color drop to fill the entire layer. Now moving up to the first painting layer, I am choosing this orange color. I'll be using the squid ink brush from the Risograph pack, and I've gone ahead and dragged this to the very top of the brush set so that it's easy for me to find. To get this Risograph look, we're going to first paint our motifs initially with a solid brush, and then add in the texture later on. So right now we're just focusing on creating the shapes of the elements. Right now I have my brush size set around 10%, and I'm just going to start by drawing in some citrus fruits. I'm doing this by drawing an ovular shape and then adding these little bumps on each end. For these first few elements that I'm drawing in, I'm clustering them mostly towards the center of the canvas. This empty space on the outer edge will be filled after we make it into a repeat. Once I have my fruit drawn, I'm moving up to my second painting layer. I'm still using the squid ink brush, and I'm going to switch to this bright blue. Now on this layer, I can paint in some little sprigs of leaves. Now as I'm drawing in these sprigs, I'm trying to keep the shapes, the sizes, and the spacing of the leaves pretty consistent. But I want this pattern to have an overall tossed appearance, so what I am varying is I am making the orientation and direction of the sprigs as random as I possibly can. I want it to look like the pattern doesn't have a clear up or down. When adding in these elements, you'll also want to be sure not to cross the edges of the canvas, or else that will interrupt the repeat. Once I've finished drawing the leaves, I'm going to add in a little more detail in the citrus layer. So I'm going to hide the leaves layer for this step. For this, I'm using these scattered stamp brushes and the eraser tool to cut out shapes from the fruit. Starting with the crisp stars brush, I'm just stamping a few separate times on each element to add this detail. Then I'm going to switch to the burst brush, adding a few more of these shapes in. Lastly, I'm going to use the blot brush to add in some small circles. These brushes can also be used outside of elements that you've already drawn to add easy filler to patterns. I made these because I was drawing a lot of these elements like stars within my own work, and I wanted a way to speed up the process. Now go back into the layers panel and turn the leaves layer back on. We can now move on to adding the risograph texture. First, I'm going to use 2 fingers to swipe right on each of these painting layers to turn Alpha Lock on. You can also access Alpha Lock by tapping the layer and choosing it from the side menu. Now I'm going into colors and choosing a solid white. And then back in layers, I'm going to tap to bring up the side menu and select Fill Layer to fill each of these 2 painting layers with the white. Now we have our solid layer masks. From here, we can paint in the texture in these 2 top riso layers. Tap the first riso layer to work in. With this layer still selected, use 2 fingers to press and hold on the citrus mask layer to just select the layer contents. Make sure that you are painting in the riso layer, not the mask layer. And then I am choosing the same orange that I initially drew the fruit with. On the paintbrush tool, I'm going to use the light riso shade brush. And I have this set to somewhat of a larger size. Using 1 continuous brush stroke, I am coloring in this selection, and then I'm also going to add in a little variation in color intensity along some of the edges. This brush blends really beautifully once it's rendered, and so you don't have to be precise when you're adding these, and you get a really authentic look. Next, move up to work on the second riso layer. Use 2 fingers to press and hold to select the contents of the leaves layer mask. Switching back to the same blue as before, I'm using 1 continuous stroke again to fill in this selection. Then I'm going to reduce my brush size a little bit, and I'm adding in some variations starting from the base of the stem and then fading out at the leaves. Next, to help add to the true risograph print look, I'm going to shift my layers slightly off register. This is the main reason why we have our layer masks separate and flexible from our texture layers. That's why we're not using clipping masks. It's so that we can get this really nice off register depth. I am going to tap on the leaves mask layer and then tap the transform tool. And now I'm just going to tap outside of the bounding box a few times to nudge the mask in that direction. As you're doing this, just be sure to stay well within the bounds of the canvas, away from all of the edges. Now I'm going to repeat for the citrus mask layer. All right, now it's time to do the first step of making this into a repeating pattern. And this is the first of 2 transform steps. In the layers panel, collapse the layer group. Now, keeping the group still selected, tap the selection tool and then tap save and load and then choose selection 1. Then tap the transform tool, and in the bottom bar that pops up, we're going to tap flip horizontal and then flip vertical, which will transverse the selection so that the outside corner is now in the center. Then tap the transform tool once more to release the selection. Next, tap the selection tool again, and under save and load, choose selection 3. Flip this horizontally and vertically as well. Lastly, we'll do these steps for selection 6. Tapping the transform tool, and then flipping it horizontally and vertically, and then tapping the transform tool once more to release the selection. And now you can see we have this empty space that we can fill in. Now, to do this while maintaining the risograph print layers, I'm going to go into the pattern group and add a brand new layer on top of the stack. Then I am going to switch back to my orange from before, and I'm going to select the squid ink brush. Now I can draw in a few more elements on this new layer. If you want, you can also move around any existing elements that aren't crossing the edges. If you do, just be sure to select any layers that interact. So for this, that would be both the reso layer and the mask layer. And you can select both of these in the layers panel and then use the freehand selection tool to draw around the object that you want to move. Additionally, when you go to transform, you might find that you need to turn snapping off in order to make the object move a little more freely around the canvas. Now, my recommendation, my official recommendation here, is to not spend too long futzing around shifting an element. You can spend, honestly, forever trying to make it perfect, but you will absolutely 100% of the time have a much better idea of spacing needs and constraints when you test out the repeat and see how it looks when it's actually tiled, which we will do at the end. So just try to place things as best as you can. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to get the placement and scale of the new elements to fit in nicely with the first set. Once I'm mostly happy with the placement, I'm going to go in with the same scattered stamps that I used before on the eraser tool, starting with the crisp stars, and then moving on to the bursts, and then finally using the blots. Now that this layer is set, I am going to drag it down so that it is just directly above the first mask layer. Then I'm going to add a new layer on top of the stack, and I'm going to change my color to blue and draw in some more leafy sprigs. Back in the layers panel, I am going in to hide the blue guides, and then I'm going to turn on the visibility of the red guides. Now in the pattern group, I'm going to move the top leaves layer down to sit above the leaves mask layer. Just like before, I'm going to make these into white layer masks. To do this, I'm going to use 2 fingers to swipe right to alpha lock this layer. Then I'm going to choose a white color, and I'm going to fill each of these locked layers. Next, I'm switching back to the orange and the light Reso shade brush. And then in my layers, I'm using 2 fingers to tap and hold on the newest citrus mask layer to select the layer contents. Then I'm moving up to make sure that I'm painting in my top Reso layer. Now I'm going to paint this texture in just as before with a single continuous stroke. Then I'm going to go back in and add a little more intensity and variation, still using this same brush. Next, I'm going to change the color to blue, and in the layers panel, I'm moving up to work on the leaves Reso layer. With this layer still selected, I'm using 2 fingers to press and hold on the newest leaves mask layer to select the layer contents. Once again here, I'm going to use a continuous stroke to fill these leaves with texture and then add in some variation. Now, while they're still separate layers, I am going to shift each of these new mask layers slightly off register again. Once that's done, I am going to merge these layers with their respective main mask layers. All right, now we have one final transformation step to do to make the pattern into a flawless repeat. Collapse the layer group and keep it selected. And now, using the red guides as reference, tap the selection tool and then tap Save and Load. And then choose Selection 5. Tap the Transform tool, and then we're going to flip this horizontally and vertically. Next, we're going to do the same for Selection 2. Tap the Transform tool, flip it horizontally, flip it vertically, and then release. And lastly, we are going to load selection 4, tap the transform tool, flip it horizontally, vertically, and then tap the transform tool once more to release the object. So now our full half drop repeat is completely established. So for example, the elements on the right side of selection 4 will match up perfectly at the top left of selection 5. And the lower left of selection 5 will match up with the right side of selection 2. Now our very last bit of pattern creation will be filling in this gap between selection 2 and 4. Once again, I'm going to go in to add a new layer at the very top of my stack to draw in the additional elements. And then I'm also switching back to the squid ink brush and changing my color to my orange. I'm also going in to adjust some of the existing elements to space things consistently. Once my new elements are added, I'm going back in with the eraser and the scattered stamps, adding the same cutouts as I did before. Now I can drag this layer down to sit above the original citrus mask layer. And then I'm going to add in one more new layer at the top of the stack so that I can draw in just a couple more leaves. Before I draw in those leaves, I am going to move around some of the existing leaves a bit. So I am going to select both the leaves mask layer and the riso layer to do this rearranging. Now I'm going to grab the same blue as before, and moving up to my empty layer, I can draw in a couple new leafy sprigs. Once these are drawn, I can drag this new leaf layer down so that it is directly above the leaves mask layer. Then I'm going to use 2 fingers to swipe right to alpha lock both of these additional layers, and then I'm changing the color to white, and then I'm going to tap to select fill layer to make both of these into mask layers. Next, I'm going to move up to work in the citrus riso layer, and using 2 fingers, I'll press and hold on the newest citrus mask so that layer contents become selected. Then I'm going to switch to the orange and the light riso shade brush, and I'm going to fill these in. Moving up to work on the leaves riso layer, I'm using 2 fingers to select the newest leaves mask layer as well. Then I'm going to select the blue and paint the riso texture in here. Now, while these mask layers are still separate, I'm going to shift each of them slightly off register to match the rest of the print. And here I'm just tapping outside of the bounding box to nudge it slightly. Then I can pinch to merge them together with their respective mask layers. Now we can hide the remaining guides, and it's time to test out the repeat. To test it and tile it, we're going to collapse the pattern layer group, making sure that it stays selected. Then on the canvas, use 3 fingers to swipe down on the screen to access the copy and paste menu. Tap copy all. Then use 3 fingers to swipe down once more and tap paste. Now this will paste a flattened version of the group contents above the group. Duplicate this flattened image until there is a total of 5 flattened images. Then select the topmost layer. Tap the transform tool, and if you turned off snapping earlier, make sure that you turn that back on and that magnetics is still on. Now grab this node on the center right side and drag inward until the edge snaps in to align with the very center of the canvas, which is indicated by the gold guidelines. You should also see the pixel dimensions of this will be evenly half of your canvas. Then lift up the pencil and tap the layers icon to move to the next layer down. On this one, we're going to drag from the lower right corner node to resize until it snaps into the upper left quadrant. Then we're going to move this object up until it's halfway off of the canvas, and then you'll see these gold guides appear. You'll also see that the pattern is aligned on this intersection. Next, move on to the third layer, and this time resize by dragging from the upper right corner node. Once it snaps into place, move the layer down until this one is halfway off the canvas and the gold guides snap into place. Now move down to work on the fourth layer. Tap the transform tool, and for this one, we're going to drag from the lower left corner node to resize until it snaps to the quadrant. And you'll see that it aligns along this edge with the rest of the pattern. Finally, you can move on to the fifth layer, tap transform, and resize this one by dragging from the upper left corner node until it snaps into place, aligning with the rest of the pattern. And there is the finished repeat. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. Hopefully you learned something. Definitely let me know if you have any questions or comments. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. And if you're not already, subscribe to my channel for more. Turn on the bell for notifications so that you never miss a video. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.